Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, everyone is doing well. Welcome to another Monday morning Tafseer. Inshallah, we will wait a couple of minutes to let people join in with us. Bi-idhnillah. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Hope everyone is doing well. Inshallah, we'll just give it another minute. I know we've got to let some people come on. Okay, Bismillah. Looks like we have a good amount of people, inshallah. So we'll get started. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala khayri khalqillah nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walah. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم لك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد من بعد الرضا لا نحصي ثناء عليك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. So inshallah we're continuing with our look into Surah Al-Ahzab. Last week we had finished up until Ayah 52, and inshallah we'll start from Ayah 53 today. We'll start with the recitation of some of the ayats. If there's any questions, inshallah, before we get started, you can put them in the chat boxes, and we'll try to address them before we get started, bi-idhnillah. Until then, I will recite the ayats from Ayah 53. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوت النبي إلا أن يؤذن لكم إلى طعام غير ناظرين إناه ولكن إذا دعيتم فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فانتشروا ولا مستأنسين لحديث إن ذلكم كان يؤذي النبي فيستحيي منكم والله لا يستحيي من الحق وإذا سألتموهن متاعا فاسألوهن من وراء حجاب ذلكم أطهر لقلوبكم وقلوبهن وما كان لكم أن تؤذوا رسول الله ولا أن تنكحوا أزواجه من بعده أبدا إن ذلكم كان عند الله عظيما إن تبدوا شيئا أو تخفوه فإن الله كان بكل شيء عليما لا جناح عليهن في آبائهن ولا أبنائهن ولا أبناء إخوانهن ولا أبناء أخواتهن ولا نسائهن ولا ما ملكت أيمانهن واتقين الله إن الله كان على كل شيء شهيدا إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما إن الذين يؤذون الله ورسوله لعنهم الله في الدنيا والآخرة وأعد لهم عذابا مهينا والذين يؤذون المؤمنين والمؤمنات بغير ما اكتسبوا فقد احتملوا بهتانا وإثما مبينا يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين وكان الله غفورا رحيما. Translation. From Ayah 53, the translation: O you who believe, enter the rooms of the Prophet ﷺ only when you are permitted to do so, to partake of a meal. Then too do not wait for it to be prepared, but enter when you are called and disperse once you have eaten without enjoying a conversation. Indeed, this hurts the Nabi ﷺ, but he is shy for you. Allah does not shy away from the truth. When you ask them for anything, then ask them from behind a curtain. This is purer for your hearts and for their hearts. It is not for you to hurt the Nabi ﷺ, nor to ever marry his wives after him. Verily, this is grave in the sight of your Rabb. If you make something public or keep it secret, then Allah certainly has knowledge of everything. There is no sin on them for their fathers, their sons, their brothers, the sons of their brothers, the sons of their sisters, their fellow women, and their slave women. They should fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is witness over everything. Verily, Allah and His angels send salah on the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. O you who have iman, send salah and salam to him. Verily, those who hurt Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Allah curses them in this world and in the akhirah, and He has prepared a humiliating punishment for them. Those who harm the believing men and women for no sin on their part will bear the burden of slander and a manifest sin. O Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers that they should draw down their jalabib over themselves. This is best for their recognition so that they are not harmed. Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Okay, Bismillah. Okay, no questions. Inshallah, so we'll get started. All right, Bismillah. So we have again some unique ayat here that are kind of solitary in the Quran in the issues that they are addressing, or relatively unique at least. So for example, here in Ayah 53, we have the ayah of it's partly the ayah of seeking permission, and then partly the ayah of hijab for the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then also in ayah 59, I believe, we have the ayah of jilbab for the believers, and this is also something relatively unique here in the Quran that we'll talk about inshallah. So there's some, again, Surah Al-Ahzab being a Madani surah, we are getting a lot of societal, community-based issues, right? So it's almost like after the Battle of Al-Ahzab, after Al-Khandaq, the city of Medina was fortified, right? Like it was protected from any outside threat or harm. So once the city is fortified from external forces and from external threats, now these ayat here, and the ayat since, you know, the surah, since it stopped talking about after it covered the Battle of Al-Ahzab, now it's talking with a lot, it's talking about, or it's dealing with a lot of societal, community-based issues that are helping to fortify the city from within, right? So it's almost as if, right, those external forces have been neutralized. External safety is there. Now we need to make sure, right, that the internal peace is kept, and that the internal state of the city is fortified as well. And this comes by fortifying these relationships, in terms of marriage, and in terms of even the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fortifying that from the outside and from the inside as well. A lot of these community-based issues in modesty and in dress code and these kind of things that are helping to maintain the internal fortification of the city, right? Because even if a city, or even if a place is externally safe, there's no outside threat of war or of invasion or anything like that, but there's not a way to keep the internal peace between the citizens of that city, or between, within the families, then that can be something that tears apart the city from within. And especially like some of the ayat that we've talked about, when you have the hypocrites still kind of lurking in the city, and spreading rumors and being subversive and looking for scandal, it makes it even that much more important to make sure that that the city is safe internally as well. That the city is safe internally as well, and that the moral fabric is maintained within the society. So keep that in mind when we talk about some of these rulings, and when we talk about some of these laws here that we have in these ayat that are important for making sure that a society is internally strong as well. So this ayah here, ayah 53, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, is addressing the believers. And this ayah actually is kind of an extension of the story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying Zainab. It's revealed around this same time, actually in this same incident, in this same moments. Because what happened was, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, the ayah that we have that mentions zawajnaka, we married you to her. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is married to Zainab by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, right? That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had some of the companions over for a walima. Anas radiallahu anh, he mentions the story, and he says that when this happened, that the Prophet ﷺ had invited some of the companions over for a meal of meat and bread. Right? Very simple walima in the house of the Prophet ﷺ. So you can imagine that you can't even fit that many people there, right? But they're there, and they are eating, and this is the sunnah, right? That to have a walima, to have some sort of meal, and that is a kind of a like a celebration, right? It's a celebratory meal to kind of publicize this union between two people, and that is from the sunnah, right? So the idea of like marriage as being secret is not from the sunnah. It's not from the sunnah. And so the idea is that you have, when two people are getting married, that it becomes known. That way, if they're seen together or whatever it may be, that it's known that these two people are married. It's halal, no problem, inshallah. Right? So it maintains the the social kind of I was going to say like sakina, the social serenity in the city, that you don't have rumors, oh, did you see this girl, she's out with this guy, and these things. This should never happen anyway, of course. But to even remove that possibility, the walima is not just a celebration, but it's an announcement of this union between two people. Now that's the sunnah. The sunnah is not to have something extravagant, right? Where it overly burdens the couple for the rest of their marriage, right? But the sunnah is that it is something that you're able to invite people over, they're able to benefit, like the Prophet ﷺ does here, right? And so you have these companions who are in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and they are they just had a meal. And what happens is that they are enjoying themselves. They're having a good time with each other. And so they end up staying for a lot longer than what would normally be expected. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ, out of his manners, out of his etiquette, he doesn't obviously tell them to leave. Okay? But what he does instead, so they're talking, they're enjoying each other's company. What he does instead is that he leaves, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he goes and he visits his other wives. And he has Anas radiallahu anhu with him. And so Anas mentions that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went to check up on his other wives. And he went and gave salam to them and saw how they were doing, and they asked him, because they knew that the Prophet ﷺ had just gotten married to Zainab, and so they asked him about, Zainab and these kind of things. And so it's just the Prophet ﷺ, taking advantage of the opportunity now, right? He has people in his house and they're not leaving, and so he goes to his different homes and he visits his wives. And Anas radiallahu anhu, he says, I don't remember if I told the Prophet ﷺ that they had left, meaning finally, eventually that they left, or if he knew that they left and he went back to his home, went back to the house of Zainab. Right? He said, I don't remember which one of these it was, if I told him or if he knew when he went back. And then so he said, so I went back with the Prophet ﷺ to the house now of Zainab radiallahu anha, and I was going to enter with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered, he put down the curtain. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't have doors. There was no, it wasn't a door in the entrance of his house. If you see how the houses of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were, it's that you have an entrance that's covered with a curtain, basically, for the internal entrance. So there's the internal room, and that has it's an opening, and it would have a curtain. And so the Prophet ﷺ entered, and Anas says, I was going to enter with him, and فَأَلْقَى بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَهُ السِّتْرِ, that he basically dropped the curtain between me and him, وَنَزَلَ الْحِجَابِ. And this is when the ayah of hijab came down, and this is this ayah here. Okay, so this ayah is addressing two main issues here, or actually more than two, a few main issues here. And the first that it's addressing is kind of the etiquettes of visiting the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la tadkhulu buyut an-nabi, O you who believe, don't enter the houses of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why buyut? Buyut is the plural of bayt, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a house for each of his wives. And when we say house, we don't mean a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. He had a loft and a backyard. We mean rooms. Okay, literally. Yani these are rooms. Hujurat. Yani they're rooms. So the way, for example, the house of Aisha radiallahu anha was. So you kind of have an idea. I wish I had the picture. Let's see if I can pull it up. Is that it was, so for example, when the Prophet ﷺ is in the masjid, his door, the wall of his house is the same wall as the wall of the masjid. Okay? And which means between the masjid and his house is this wall, and there's a door. And so if you enter into, if you're in the masjid and the Prophet ﷺ is entering into the house of Aisha, for example, he enters into a room. That room is open air. Yani it's like a small room, or a small, like you could say, outside area, because there's no roof above it. And then it's small though, right? And then that enters into the actual hujra, the actual like apartment, which is one room. So you could say that the house here is just 2 rooms, almost like a patio, backyard kind of small room area. That's when you enter from the masjid. And then there is a small hujra, a small like apartment that has a door there as well to enter into that. Okay, so this is how the homes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were. They were, in essence, it was a room. It was a room. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, let me see if I can pull it up. La tadkhulu buyut an-nabi. Don't enter the homes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's hard to see, but anyways, hopefully the explanation did it right, inshallah. But courtyard, good. It's like a small courtyard that enters into the home. That enters into the home. Is there any schematic of how the houses were situated? Yeah, there's some. There's a good book. It's called Buyut al-Sahaba. It's in Arabic. You can find it even online. That has a good kind of breakdown. It doesn't really have many like drawings that you could see, like 3D images, but it has a good really kind of breakdown of how like where the houses of the Sahaba were, the hujurat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how they looked as well. Meaning like where they were, not necessarily inside how they looked. And then now there's also online, there's a very, very nice museum in Medina. It's called Darul Medina. That has like tours of the entire city and of the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all of these things. It's a good option. And then they also sell a book there that has all of these things in book form. Inshallah, if we get the opportunity to go back, it's something that you can check out for sure. But the idea here is that Allah is saying, don't enter into the homes of the Prophet ﷺ, so any of his homes. But again, we have to keep in context what it means. I wouldn't be surprised if all of the homes of the Prophet ﷺ, all 9 of them, were even equivalent to, an apartment or a small home that, that someone would have now. I know that they do even mention the dimensions. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I mean, it wasn't like super, super tiny where no one can move in it, but it wasn't, obviously, we're not talking about, even a big studio or anything like that. It's literally a room. And remember, they didn't have bathrooms inside of their house or anything like that either. So it's literally a room. And you have the bed, you have like a small seating area, and that's pretty much it, right? So so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying, don't enter the homes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam illa an yu'dhana lakum ila ta'am, except if you're given permission to enter. And here it's mentioned ila ta'am, yani to a meal. So obviously, if the Prophet ﷺ allows someone to enter into his home, if someone has a question or whatever, then that's also permission that's being given. But here again, remember we mentioned the story, and this is what's in the context of being invited over for a meal here. So if the Prophet ﷺ invites you for a meal, don't enter until you have been given permission to do so. غَيْرَ نَاظِرِينَ إِنَاهِ. غَيْرَ نَاظِرِينَ إِنَاهِ. It means like you're invited for the meal. Don't wait for it to be prepared, right? This means, yani, for example, okay, you're invited to the meal at Maghrib time. Don't show up to the house of the Prophet ﷺ at Dhuhr or at Asr and say, I'm here for the meal, right? And you're there for a few hours before that to, you know, to just, yeah, I'm just here, right? And of course, you can imagine that if the companions, or if any of the companions are invited, and remember how many companions you have and all of these things, you have to keep these things in mind. But, you know, if a companion is invited over to the house of the Prophet ﷺ for something like this, they're going to obviously want to maximize the time that they have. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you know, for the sake of the time and the privacy and the Prophet ﷺ being able to be with his family, and we know how much responsibilities the Prophet ﷺ had, and how, you know, how much how valuable his time is, and at the same time how generous he was with his time, and how he would give that to everyone and to anyone who asked for it and who wanted it. When Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anh, he says, I was with the Prophet ﷺ and we were walking together, and an old woman stopped him, right? And she had, you know, she wanted to talk with him. And so the Prophet ﷺ kind of goes to the side and he talks with her. And Adi says, at that moment, I knew this wasn't just like a king or a regular ruler. I knew this man was something special, was someone special. He wasn't Muslim at that time. He was Christian, right? He says, I knew that this was a prophet. I knew this was someone special, because no king or ruler would have spent that much time talking to this woman like that, right? Where maybe she doesn't even have, like, it's maybe a question, but you know, some people, they just want to talk, and some people just want to be able to have someone to talk, especially a lot of times elderly. You know, you may have an interaction with someone, and they may, you know, at the store or whatever it may be, and you can see that they just want someone to talk to, right? And what happens a lot of time is, okay, you want to be cordial and you want to be friendly and stuff, but you know, I have things to do, I have places to be, and you may start to get a little bit annoyed, and you may start to try to find a way out of the conversation, and anything that gets you out, you jump on it and you're gone, right? So Adi radiallahu anh, he says, when I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving this much time and attention to this old woman, he said, I knew that this was someone special, right? And it shows again the sincerity and the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the manners of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that he could have easily, do you know, you know, I'm with someone, I'm busy, I have things to do, and be completely justified in doing so. Yet the Prophet ﷺ would give his time in this way. A young girl would come, and the hadith mentions, كَانَ فِي عَقْلِهَا شَيْء. Yani, she may have been someone who had even special needs. Yani, she's someone who's yani, not like, it wasn't just like someone who specifically needed something. It's just that, you know, she may have had special needs, and she goes and she grabs the hand of the Prophet ﷺ, and basically she's like, I want to show you something, I want to you know, take you somewhere. And the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith mentions, he says, whatever you need, take me wherever you want, like I'm here with you, right? في أي سكك المدينة, يعني any of the streets of Medina. And again, this shows yani, genuineness, right, and a purity and character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is you could say almost like defending the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or giving the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam his haqq, his right here, something that he would be too embarrassed to say, right? So غَيْرَ نَاظِرِينَ إِنَاهِ, don't come uninvited, or don't enter uninvited, or don't come too long before, like waiting for the meal, right? Rather what? وَلَكِنْ إِذَا دُعِيتُمْ, rather when you are invited, فَادْخُلُوا, then enter, no problem. فَإِذَا طَعِمْتُمْ فَانْتَشِرُوا, when you have eaten, right, that you've gotten the blessing, the barakah of eating in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَانْتَشِرُوا, then go, then leave, do what you got to do, right? وَلَا مُسْتَأْنِسِينَ لِحَدِيثٍ, and don't spend too much time engaged in conversation. Don't enjoy musta'nisin, they're enjoying this conversation. Of course, you're in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What an amazing invitation. You're with some of the other companions, there's food, right? And so, we know how a lot of times how our gatherings are, right? It ends up becoming a 5, 6, 7 hour affair, right? And it can go late into the night, and people may have work the next day, and these kind of things, right? So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing the proper manners when it comes to the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just once you've eaten, once you've been invited, you eat, then you kind of go and you disperse without kind of remaining behind and enjoying like a lengthy conversation. And don't overstay your welcome. Inna dhalikum, indeed these things, kana yu'dhin nabi, that they kind of annoyed or bothered, or they in a way they harm the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like in this case, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has just gotten married. He's in his home. These companions have come over, and they just are staying, right? And so this is something that is, it's not the best of manners. Inna dhalikum kana yu'dhi an-nabi fayastahi minkum. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was shy from you, shy to tell you, or embarrassed to tell you to leave, right? No host. It's a considered a very rude thing for, some people are blunt. They'll tell you, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? But most people are not going to tell their guest, well, you have to leave, okay? So فَيَسْتَحْيِي مِنْكُمْ, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was shy from you. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَسْتَحْيِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not shy from the truth, is not shy from what's right. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, eat and leave, okay? And so this is the first part, the first kind of lesson, or the first the first etiquette here that's being delivered, the first rule, the first law, the first manner that's being taught to the companions here in terms of the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as you've seen through us kind of going through this, we can benefit from this as well, right? We can benefit from. So even though this is being directed to the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and being in his company and these kind of things, that we can take from this some etiquettes when it comes to visiting people's homes, right? So making sure that you don't just come in uninvited, and some of these things are established and set, but some of these things also go back to the urf, or the cultural norm, the normative kind of way that things are done in that time or that place, right? So, visiting someone's house unannounced, that could be something that is culturally acceptable, but obviously you're not going to enter until you get permission, right? That's something that is set and established right? Unless it's known that like maybe you have a relative that you've kind of it's understood, or even that you've explicitly given them permission that they can enter into your house without permission. But the etiquette, the rule, and the manner is that you don't enter anyone's house without taking their permission, right? And even the way that you enter into the house, there's etiquettes that you can, you knock on the door a certain amount of time, and that you don't, like you, and they ask you who it is, and you announce yourself, and you don't look into the home. So they open the door, and you kind of are turned one way or the other, so that you're not looking directly into their home without their permission, and these kind of things. So there are etiquettes that are kind of rules that we've been given when it comes to entering people's homes and these kind of things. But the general thing here is obviously not entering into someone's home without permission. And even if it becomes like a cultural norm that you even don't show up to someone's home without letting them know before, and these kind of things, and that's also something that should be taken into consideration. But if you are in the neighborhood and it's good maybe to give any, like, let's say you're around and you say, oh, well, I know I'm in this area and I know fulan or this person lives here, haven't seen them in a long time, I want to visit them. And so you give them a call, right? That's what the etiquette of the matter. You give them a call, hey, I'm in the neighborhood, are you available? Can we come by? These kind of things. We want to just visit, come say salam. Right? So the Islamic etiquette should be observed here, and then the cultural norms also should be taken into consideration here as well, right? But we can take benefit from this in terms of not entering into people's homes. If someone tells you to come at a certain time, right? This is also something that we have an issue with in our communities, that someone tells you to come at a certain time. Usually people don't come earlier than that time. But that's something that should be taken into consideration. Not entering. Not entering before, not coming before the time. And also, respecting the time of the host. So not coming, extremely late. If you're expected to come at a certain time, not, you're expected to come at 7. I know sometimes even now we've built that into the invitation. Like you tell people 7 because they're not going to come till 8. So that has to be understood, or even 8, maybe early 9. Right. So that's something I think that needs to be kind of understood within the framework of the culture and the time as well. But generally, if you're invited at a certain time, that should be the time that you come, or at least to let the hosts know that you're going to be late, and these kind of things, right? Because these are things that can burden the host, and they're opening up their home to you, and these kind of and giving you that, honoring you by someone inviting you into their home. That's a big deal. Right? Because this is like their safe space. This is their sanctuary. And so you don't invite just anyone into your home, right? That's why you have a door and a lock on it. But if someone invites you into their home, they're honoring you, right? And they're letting you into a part of their life that is generally private. And so that's something that should be, that consideration should be kept on behalf of for the guests as they're coming, and these kind of things, right? And there's the etiquettes with this as well, even for the guest and for the host, and these kind of things. But here, so ولكن إذا دعيتم فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فتشربوا. Same thing, right? Not overstaying your welcome. Not overstaying your welcome. So for example, that the host has work the next day, and yet you're still there, late into the night, and expecting more and more to be hosted, or even if you're not expecting more food or whatever, to wait, I didn't even have dessert yet, and all these things, but even just to stay beyond your welcome. And sometimes, and these are all, that's why I said these are all things that you have to be a little bit socially aware, emotionally intelligent to kind of pick up on hints and clues to understand. Sometimes, the hosts, they want you to be there, and they're very happy with you staying a long time, and they expect for you to be there and these kind of things. But sometimes there are indications that it's time to go as well, right? So to make sure that you're aware of these things, and just in general to be a gracious host, a gracious guest, right? The host by default is going to be usually gracious and generous in these things. So to repay that by being a gracious guest as well. And once they start maybe yawning, putting the kids to sleep, start doing certain things that indicate it's time to go, then the guest shouldn't put the host in a uncomfortable or a bothered position that they have to kind of almost kick them out of the house, right? And that's kind of what we see here, that we can apply for ourselves, because like we said, no host is going to, especially after welcoming someone into their home, no host is going to express, that level of frustration or, bluntness with their guests. So the guest should take hint, right? So that's the first part. And again, we can take many benefits for ourselves from this. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives another part here, and this is the part of hijab. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ مَتَاعًا فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. This is the part, and this is the ayah here that gives the hijab of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we talked about this in Surah An-Nur, and this surah came before Surah An-Nur. So these ayat here are actually coming before the ayat of Surah An-Nur. So the ayat in Surah An-Nur are kind of the ayat of the khimar and these kind of things, and we're going to come to that inshallah. A little bit more of a discussion on the hijab, or the covering in ayah 59 here. But here it's specifically referring to the hijab of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we have to, like we did in Surah An-Nur, define hijab, because for us, in our kind of colloquial understanding, hijab is the headscarf, right? But hijab actually means a barrier. Hijab actually means a barrier. So when we say hijab, usually we're referring to a woman wearing a headscarf, which actually is khimar. The word for that's mentioned in the Quran is the khimar. Okay? The hijab is the barrier, is a barrier. Okay? And so when it's talking here, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ are being, this is being addressed to the companions when you ask them for something, right? Whether it's a question or something that you need, right? فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. Ask them from behind a barrier, from behind a hijab. And so the wives of the Prophet had an additional level or layer of covering, and that is that they were commanded to actually physically have a barrier between them and those who were not from their direct, like maharim, their family, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course. But the general public, the general companions, there is an actual barrier. So it's like you can't even see the outline or the figure of any of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. There's an actual like curtain or wall or barrier between the companions and between them. Okay, this is an additional level that is only and that is specific for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. Can we take benefit from this in our interactions? Yes, we can, right? As well, right? But it's not, obviously it's not to the level of this obligation that the wives of the Prophet had to have this actual physical barrier. Why? ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِنْ. That is pure for your hearts and for their hearts. Okay? Athar indicates that there's already purity in the hearts of the companions and in the hearts of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. There's already purity. But to add or to increase or to ensure the continuity and the expansion or the extension of that purity, that this is the directive or the command that's being given. And this shows as well that this shows the reality of, you know, of this dynamic between, you know, men and between women, that you can have pure intentions and pure heart, but there also needs to be precautions that are taken to ensure and to maintain that purity. You can't just say, because I have pure intention, that I know that that I'm not going to put any restrictions between me and women who are halal for me or even haram for me, but there's no barrier there. So I'm not going to have any barrier, any, you know, just talk to them normally, keep communication with them open very normally, go visit them in their house, they come visit me in my house, go out to eat with them, they come out to eat with me. If you don't have any barrier there at all or any precautions taken, you're setting yourself up for problems down the road, and maybe even problems immediately, because the dynamic and the reality is that these are, you know, that attractions can develop and that slip-ups can happen, and that, you know, you don't want to put yourself in a position that can harm you down the road. And we have to be just very open and honest with this, right? And this doesn't mean, again, making things awkward or making things weird or making things like taking it to another extreme, right? That it's a middle path, but it always must err on the side of caution, because we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, many instances and many cases where the intentions can start out pure and there can be no initial maybe attraction or initial issue, but with time things can chip away and things can those barriers can be kind of removed or overcome in a negative way that can end up leading into problems, right? And you know what I'm talking about. This is something that's, I don't need to explain it as much as it can be known and understood from just the waqi', the reality, right? And the many stories that maybe you even know, that you've seen, that you've heard about in your own circles, right? But then also we know is very, very common and very, very open in the society of, you know, people falling into the haram or falling into compromising situations and positions as a result of not taking heed of these precautions and these kind of things. Right? And so Allah is saying, ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِنْ. It's more pure for your hearts and for their hearts, to remove any sort of possibility or any sort of avenue towards something that can pollute the heart, that can lead to something impermissible or illicit from happening, right? And this is a clear reality that, again, that I think is understood by all. It's understood by all. The story of Barsisa, one of the most famous stories that we have in our tradition, and there is a lot of lesson in that, right? That it can start in the most pure of intention and in the most, in the most protective of ways, but the shaitan likes to work slowly. He's okay with working slowly and getting, kind of chipping away until a person ends up saying, I don't know how I ended up in this position. I don't know. And I don't know how I ended up doing what I did and falling into this, right? So an ounce of prevention is always better than a pound of cure, as we have heard, right? And recognizing this reality and acknowledging it is better than, and taking the precautions is better than, having some sort of faux or some sort of fake idea of, oh no, I'm not, I don't see that, I don't see things like that, and I would never, and I this is just purely, whatever it may be, it's just my cousin. And sometimes that's the I don't look at her as like, I look at her like my sister. Is she your sister? No? Okay then, right? And again, this doesn't mean take it to the other extreme either. It's like I'm not even gonna, interact or talk or have any sort of even professional. No, it's not what we're saying. I'm not even gonna give salam. No, don't take this because I'm emphasizing this part and extrapolate it to the other side. But it has to be a balanced, a middle approach that takes that errs on the side of caution. Errs on the side of caution. Okay, so that's the second part. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُمْ فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. And this is why, after this point, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ would only be interacted with behind the hijab, behind like this physical barrier. So asking them and interacting with them, it happens in this way. It happens in this way. We have a question. Generally, did the Prophet ﷺ immediately communicate verses to companions that they were revealed? If the companions were not, yes. If he received the revelation and that revelation came to him, and he would communicate that revelation. And he would even have it written down. He had some scribes who would write it down. Is this evidence in the Quran for women to wear hijab? This particular part is not. This particular part is not. It's coming though. That's coming, inshallah. This, like we said, is specifically the hijab of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And again, remember, hijab meaning barrier and not necessarily the covering. That's going to come. وَمَا كَانَ لَكُمْ أَن تُؤْذُوا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And it's not befitting of you or allowed for you to do adhiya of Rasulullah, to bother, to harm, to annoy the Prophet ﷺ. Right? And this, of course, means when it comes to his time, when it comes to his family, when it comes to his wives, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَلَا أَن تَنْكِحُوا أَزْوَاجَهُ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ أَبَدًا. And here's another ruling that's given, that it's not allowed for any of you to marry his wives after him, yani after he passes away, ever. Okay? So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away, yani this tahrim, and this is something again that's unique to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to the prophets in general, is that when they pass away, their wives still remain haram on everyone. Whereas if one of us passes away, male or female, then, but especially the female, because the female, that's it. Yani when she's married, she's married. She's haram on everyone else. Okay, but when the husband passes away, once the waiting period of the woman is over, 4 months and 10 days, that it's allowed for her to get married again, right? And this was something that was not taboo in the time of the companions. Like and there's many instances where a companion, a female companion, her husband would die, and after her mourning period, after her waiting period, that she would be married by one of the companions, one of the other companions. And this would be a very normal thing, which again, maybe to us is a little bit, we look at it in our kind of norm, it's maybe a little bit strange. Like your friend marries your wife after you've passed away. But the idea is that, you know, from their perspective, this wasn't a taboo, because this is a obviously a righteous person who now is past her mourning period, and so to take care of her, maybe she has kids and these kind of things, that this would be something very normal, very normal. So you may read some of these, you know, instances where, you know, a companion passes away, and then, you know, someone else marries, you know, maybe one of his even friends marries his wife, his ex-wife at that point, his widow, after, and it was considered very normal, right? And again, so for us, we maybe kind of put barriers or made these things a little bit taboo, but that's something that is allowed. But for the Prophet, for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's hurma, and that impermissibility remains. Why? Because again, these are the mothers of the believers, right? These are the mothers of the believers. So even after the spiritual father, the Prophet ﷺ, passes away, that the mothers still remain the mothers, and so there's no marriage to them, and also there's a wisdom in this as well, and that is clear wisdom, and that is that that these wives are now, and besides being, or in addition to being the mothers of the believers, they're also the teachers of the ummah. They're also teaching the companions and the tabi'een and those who came after. They're teaching them how the Prophet ﷺ was. And they, as we know, you know, the wives like Aisha radiallahu anha, Salama, they were very strong as scholars and as narrators of hadith, narrators of the life and times of the Prophet ﷺ, especially that internal and that private aspect, that private life. And that's why you find so much of the life of the Prophet ﷺ and his private life, his private time, is narrated by the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, especially after he passed away. And I mean, and if you think about it too, and this is from the wisdoms of the Prophet ﷺ marrying Aisha, that she's about 18 years old, 18, 19 years old when the Prophet ﷺ passes away. And she lives decades later. She lives for literally decades after that. And so now, yani, her life is at this point dedicated to teaching the ummah, her ibadah, and teaching the ummah. You know, what an amazing, amazing resource that is, to have, you know, this person who was so close with the Prophet ﷺ, and not only that, but so intelligent and so strong as a scholar in her own right, right? Like, and it's like nur on nur, like light upon light. Not only is she someone, imagine we knew someone was, you know, close with a big scholar, right? And they benefited, and they learned, and they at least memorized or took from that scholar. There is a, we would make an extra effort to try to benefit from that scholar, right? And this is actually what we have now. Like, and I've noticed this in particular, like for example, with a lot of the students of Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, that you find that they are in their own right very, very strong scholars, and the ones that spent a lot of time with him, that like there is a strong pull towards them in terms of benefiting from them, and these kind of things. And you know, so even though we never got the opportunity to study and to meet Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, that some of his big students, even until now, are very kind of widespread and popular, and you see the strength of them. So someone being close to someone like that. Now imagine Aisha being so close to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and having that connection with him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then on top of that, her herself being such a sharp mind and such a wonderful scholar, right? So there's a benefit in that, but also this is preserving, the honor and the like the sanctity of that relationship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa taala says, "Inna dhalikum kana 'inda Allahi 'azima." That is a grave thing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To hurt the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or to marry his wives after he passes away, that's a big deal. That's a big no-no. It's a big no-no, right? So that is that ayah. I spent a long time on that. Jamil, Sister Ira mentioned an example. Asma bint Umays married to Ja'far, Abu Bakr, and Ali. Very good, very good. That's actually the example that I was thinking about. That you would see, that she was married to some of the greatest of the companions, some of the greatest, Ja'far, radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr, and Ali. Excellent. Okay, the question, we have another one. Does khimar have to be confirmed when you have visitors at one's home? Yeah, if they're not maharim, the hijab, if they're not from your unmarriageable kin, they don't have that status or that position, then yes, the hijab still has to be, the khimar has to be observed. It's like you being outside. So just because you're inside of your home, if you have people like who are not allowed to see you without your khimar, then the khimar does have to still be observed. Yes, and I noticed actually that's an interesting. I'm not sure if this is in other cultures as well, but I've noticed in some cultures that there's this. It's interesting. It was interesting to me. It was like a little bit. I was a little bit taken aback by it. But like you have, and I'm not sure if the reason that this question was being asked is because that's also in some other cultures. But I noticed, visiting some people, that sometimes maybe it's a subculture within a culture, I don't know. But sometimes you would have, women who observe hijab, who wear the hijab, the jilbab and these things. Outside and normally, but when they're in their home and there's family friends over, or close, maybe it's just close family friends, that the woman don't wear the hijab, like they take off the khimar, not in like that, not in like an inappropriate way, of course, but just they just take off the hijab. And I was a little bit it was interesting to me, and it was like I was a little bit confused, or a little bit kind of taken aback by that I don't know if this was like just from the adat, like from the culture, from the norm, or if this was something that maybe they didn't know, or what it was. But yes, in general, this is hijab, of course, still applies. It still applies, even if you're in your home, if the ones who are there and who can see are not from the maharim, that the hijab still is there. So it's not about where you are, but it's about who's around you. It's about who's around you. Okay. Jazakallah khair. Let's continue, inshallah. إن تبدوا شيئا أو تخفوه فإن الله كان بكل شيء عليما. If you make something public or keep it secret, then Allah certainly has knowledge of everything. So Allah is aware. Allah is aware of what's made public. Allah is aware of what's internal and what's kept secret, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And then the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's public, what we keep inside, right? This is this reminds us of of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made these rules or these conditions and these directives for us. Allah is aware of external, internal realities. Okay, so these are all things that are that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of. And so, maybe the internal struggles of trying to practice these things, maybe the what a person is saying, but they have kept inside, so they're making a certain claim externally, but they're hiding something different inside. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of all of these things. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is certainly knowledge, certainly has knowledge of everything, right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He kind of lifts some of the burden off of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because obviously this is a difficult command here, that now they have to have a hijab between them, this physical barrier between them and everyone else. So it's clarified here that who this doesn't apply to, right? These direct maharim or relatives of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So la junaha alayhin, yani there's no sin on them, there's no blame on them. In who? Fi abaihin, with their fathers, right? Wala abnaihin, or their sons. Wala ikhwanihin, or their brothers. Wala abnai ikhwanihin, or their nephews, yani the sons of their brothers. Wala abnai akhawatihin, or the sons, the nephews from the sons of their sisters. Wala nisaihin, or their fellow women, right? Wala ma malakat aymanuhun, or their slave woman as well. Wattaqin Allah. With all of this, you still have to have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah kana ala kulli shay'in shahida. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is witness over everything, right? And so this, it loosens that restriction, or at least it clarifies the restriction of the hijab on the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it doesn't apply here to these maharim, to these relatives. So they can still have that interaction. There doesn't need to be that physical barrier between them and their fathers. So Aisha, for example, and her father Abu Bakr. Wala abna'ihin. Some of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had sons, right? Like Salama radiallahu anha had Salama, right? Her son. So she doesn't have to have a barrier between her and her son. Wala ikhwanihin, or their brothers, right? So for example, Aisha, her brother Abdurrahman, right? Also Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. So her brothers, any brothers, right? Blood brothers, even full brother, half brother, whatever it may be. Wala abna'i ikhwanihin, or their nephews, right? From either side, yani from their brother or from their sister, right? So the famous one that comes to mind is from abna'i akhawatihin, the Urwa ibn Zubayr. Urwa ibn Zubayr, who is the Urwa ibn Zubayr is the nephew of Aisha. His mother was Asma, his father is Zubayr ibn Awwam. So Urwa took advantage of this because Aisha is his khala, right? And so he took advantage of having more direct access to Aisha. And so he even said, like, if 4 years even before she passed away, I wouldn't have regretted not taking anything from her. Meaning that everything that she knew and she taught, I had taken from her 4 years even before she passed away. Which means what? It means he did mulazama of her. And he benefited from her tremendously. And he you can imagine, like, if he knows everything from her 4 years even before she passed away, how much time Urwa spent with her. Urwa was from the Tabi'een. He wasn't from the Sahaba, right? But he spent an enormous amount of time and a beneficial amount of time with Aisha. And so he becomes one of Fuqaha as-sab'a, one of the 7 great scholars of Medina from the Tabi'een, right? Because he took advantage of his aunt Aisha as a teacher, as a scholar, right? And he didn't have that same barrier, so he could enter in, and be with her and be around her without the hijab, without that hijab, right? So he was smart. He took advantage of that relationship, and this also shows, that the reality of uh, benefiting from female scholars, right? And especially if you have a relative who is knowledgeable as a male, and you have that mahram relationship with them, right? You're a male and you have a mahram relationship, maybe your mother-in-law, maybe an aunt, your mother, whoever, a sister, who has a lot of knowledge, to take advantage of that relationship where you don't have a lot of the same barriers, right? In terms of learning from them. That hijab barrier, that is a barrier from being able to fully maybe benefit, right? There's still, though, many examples of female scholars, like Aisha, for example, and many other female scholars. Ibn Hajar, one of his main teachers, was a female who wasn't a mahram, so still being able to benefit, but of course with proper decorum and with proper conditions and these things. So that's there for sure. But to have a relative, like I was actually just with a brother a few days ago, and he's married, and his mother-in-law, mashallah, is very, very knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable. And I told him, I said, take advantage of that. Take it, benefit from your mother-in-law, as maybe that relationship it's difficult, because she's not at the end of the day his mother-in-law, but to take advantage of that relationship there, and that greater access that you may have, and to be able to benefit from that, So that's something that Urwa, he did, and look what, at what level or what status it took him to, from being able to do that. Same thing, Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhuma. His aunt, his khala, was Maymuna, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Ibn Abbas, he leveraged that relationship to spending a night with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his home, which he wouldn't have been able to do with any of the other wives, obviously, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his cousin, right? But the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are still, they're foreign to him, and they're not his direct relatives like that. And so he wouldn't have been able to do that, but Maymuna was his aunt, was his khala. And so as a result of that, he was able to spend a night in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he mentioned, he says the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sleeping in his bed next to Maymuna. So they were sleeping like, so you have like, you have a bed like this, right? And so he says, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Maymuna were sleeping this way, and I slept at the end of the bed this way. Right? So he was like literally, and at the edge of the bed. And he says, and so I stayed up the whole night. I wanted to see exactly, what the Prophet ﷺ was going to do, and in terms of his ibadah and these kind of things. That's someone who's intelligent, right? And who's using that relationship and that access to his benefit. And so he says, and so I pretended that I was sleeping. I just wanted to wait. And so he said, I saw then the Prophet ﷺ get up and make wudu and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and get up and start to pray qiyam. And then he saw sallallahu Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My apologies. I lost my connection. Okay, so I'm not sure where I got cut off, but the idea is that that this sorry. Opening my screens. Okay. Hopefully everyone is able to be back on. I know it froze for a little bit. My apologies for that. Yes, so here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, He is giving the exceptions, and these are the maharim, the unmarriageable kin, or these relatives that they don't have those same restrictions. And so also you have, so we said, Jazakallah khair. That's Abdullah ibn Abbas. So then you have wala nisa'ihin, or their woman, the fellow woman, yani, so they have access to them. That they obviously, like a woman doesn't have to be behind a hijab when she's talking to the woman of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yani the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's issues yani related to this. Is this all women, or is this only believing woman? Even when it comes to hijab, there's some discussion on this, which maybe we'll talk about when we get to inshallah. Like, does a woman have to wear hijab in front of non-Muslim women, and these kind of things? And there's some discussion on that, but that is, in front of fellow women here, it's kept general. وَلَا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُنْ, in front of their slave women as well. They don't have to have that hijab. But at the same time, وَاتَّقِينَ اللَّهِ, they should still fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even amongst maharim, and this is something that we can benefit from as well, that even amongst unmarriageable kin, okay, nephews, nieces, nephews, brothers, uncles, these relatives, that there still should be a level of modesty, of course, and there is still, it's not just an open door that, oh, this is a mahram, so I can wear whatever and act however. No, there still needs to be obviously a level of decorum and a level of proper the way that a person conducts themselves and the way that a person dresses, it should still be on the level, on the side of modesty, especially with maybe like further relatives, or maybe you have a relative who's a mahram, but they are still a little bit foreign in terms of, maybe it's like an uncle that you met for the first time as an adult, right? Yes, he's your mahram and these kind of things, but that doesn't mean, you still have to keep into consideration and take into, understanding the context. And so it's not just a free for all. That's why Allah, there's still a directive here, wattaqin Allah, still to have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there even is, if there is a fear of fitna, then the restrictions that have been loosened kind of tighten up again. They kind of tighten up again. And this is, by the way, across the board. This is not just specific to hijab. This is in general. That if there are, you know, if there is indications or there is issues even within the family, and this happens. We just again, we have to be very open and honest about these things, you know. And sometimes I know it's not the norm, and it's an exception, and these kind of things, and that's why it's not, you know, it's not listed here or given here as the norm. But when Allah says "Wattaqin Allah," have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's to be aware of this concept in general, right? And then also to, you know, we can understand this as to be aware of those exceptions where you may have relatives who, you know, there is unwanted advances and these kind of things. In these cases, you know, the sisters and our women, they should, and the men too as well, it can happen on both sides, but they should protect themselves and kind of, you know, maybe, so even though it may be allowed for them to have, to loosen some of those restrictions, to still kind of, for their own selves, their own protection, their own safety, to kind of, you know, tighten those restrictions again. You know, so for example, again, I'm just going to be very open here. If there is unwanted advances from a mahram relative, whether it's an uncle or, you know, someone else, a nephew, whatever it may be, that the you know, and it's allowed. The default is that it's allowed, for example, for a woman to be alone with her uncle. It's her uncle, right? But if there is the fear of this fitna, or if there's an indication of this, then that's not something that should happen, right? And I know this is very clear and very, and it doesn't need to be said, but sometimes what doesn't need to be said needs to be said, just to make it clear, so that you understand that there's a difference between what's the law as written, but also what's there as safeguards and as these protective kind of measures to make sure that you know, that our sisters are protected and these kind of things. And this happens. This happens. And I wouldn't mention it if, you know, it's not a reality. Again, I wouldn't say that this is the default by any stretch of the imagination, at least not from what I've seen, right? But there are definitely instances and cases of this happening, and it doesn't mean that we should be paranoid in how we deal with people and stuff, but there should always, again, be, you know, we should keep these, we should always, again, err on the side of caution, or take the precautions, and not just think that just because it's like this, or just because it's this is a mahram relative, that there's absolutely no potential or you know, there's absolutely no possibility of something wrong happening, right? No, that's not the case either. وَاتَّقِينَ Allah. Have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a witness over everything. And again, it's always better to be safe than sorry. Without taking it to an extreme, but always better to be safe than sorry. And for those who have seen these cases, or who know what I'm talking about, you understand exactly what. If you don't, if you've never, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, right? But these are realities. May Allah protect all of us and our families from this. Okay. Any questions up until here? We've gone a long time without a break or without anything. We have about 20 minutes left, so we can still continue. We have some. time to take some more ayat, but I want to see if I want to take any questions, any issues. Could one of the reasons also be that a woman is in Jannah with the last person that she is married to? Jameel, very good. Jazakallah khair, Sister Rana. Definitely. That's part of it as well, is that a woman is in Jannah with the last man that she was married to. And so obviously the wives of the Prophet ﷺ are his wives in this world and in the next. And in the next. And so that is definitely one of the benefits, one of the wisdoms in that as well. Jameel. Someone also messaged me, a sister also messaged me, can it also be if the wives of the Prophet ﷺ married again and had kids that could have brought up fitna, as none of the Prophet's ﷺ kids survived, and knowing people they could have associated some kind of connection with the Prophet? Jameel. That's also another wisdom, that if they had gotten married again, potentially had kids, this could have caused a lot of problems, associations with prophethood. Very good. So there's definitely many wisdoms in that, and I think we have covered or mentioned or discussed some of them. But those are, I didn't think of that as well, but that's also a very important and beneficial point. Jazakallah khair for that as well. Anything else? Any questions? Okay, if there's any questions, put them down, inshallah, and we'll take them. Usually what happens is, like, at the end, right before we end, we get some questions and I end up going past our time. So I don't want to keep everyone on past the time, but yeah, everyone's enjoying themselves anyway, right? Yeah, so this is a good point. It says ittaqeen Allah, which is talking to the feminine plural. So this is actually talking to the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it's addressing them specifically. It's a continuation of the previous ayah of them not being able to marry anyone after, and of them having, to be behind this hijab, and la junaha alayhim. There's no harm on them, or there's no sin on them for these things. But definitely it can be extrapolated or taken and benefited by women in general as well. That women need to be more careful. And I think it's important as well for women to understand this. And it's not, a lot of times people don't like to make this distinction, or they feel like it's maybe like sexist or something to tell a woman, like, you have to be careful when it comes to interacting with men, and why aren't you talking to the man, and why aren't you blaming the man? And that needs to be there. There's no doubt about it, right? But when you're addressing each group within its own, that the necessary and the proper and the clear directive needs to be given to that group. So yes, no matter what, a man doesn't have the right to transgress or to go beyond what's allowed for them when it comes to a woman, and they need to be advised for that. And Allah does advise the men for that, and the Prophet ﷺ does advise the men for that, and we advise ourselves for that as well. But when speaking to the woman, that the advice that's given needs to be relevant and practical and direct for them as well. It needs to make them recognize the reality that maybe they don't fully understand because they're not men. So if Allah or His Messenger or someone else is telling women to be careful when it comes to their interaction with men, it's coming from a place right? Not that, oh, women are to blame or anything like that, but generally that men are a lot of times to blame, because this is just the way that a lot of times the man looks at things or functions or sees things. And so it's important that a woman understands that and recognizes that and takes the proper steps to to protect herself in that case as well. Okay, so and 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 that comes with non-mahram, and that comes even with mahram. And of course, it's different levels. And like we said, when you go as on the default, that the woman has more flexibility, of course, and more, because these and just more, like, the restrictions are a lot less when it comes to the mahram, because these are people who are going to be around her more, who she's closer with, who she grew up with. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to put on her a burden that is too difficult or more than she can handle. Okay, and so that's there, and it's no doubt about it. And even with mahram men, it's not like a completely just shut down any, or non-mahram men, it's not a completely shut down any type of communication, but it's giving the directives and the way to make sure that that objectives are achieved and precautions are taken. Precautions are taken. So the common denominator in all of these things, right, in all of our relationships, is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is recognizing that you can't pull a fast one on Allah. You may be able to pull a fast one on other people, on the woman herself. You may be able to the man may be able to trick the woman into thinking, oh yeah, I don't see you like that. I see you like my sister. He may be able to trick her, right? But he can't trick Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the common denominator. And we talked about this, I believe, last week, when we said, what's the thing that's going to stop a man who's married from looking at other women, or from flirting with other women, or from interacting in haram with other women, right? It's not necessarily going to be just the beauty of his own wife, because that eventually he'll get used to. You get used to it, right? The thing that's going to stop him at the end of the day, or I should say the strongest factor, is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because even if, even if there's a problem or in his relationship with his wife, he's not going to go to haram, because he recognizes that it's haram and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. That's what the taqwa of Allah does here, right? So the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the common denominator. And that's why we said this. Hassan al-Basri, he says, marry your daughter to someone who has taqwa. Why? Because if he loves her, then he's going to honor her, right, as someone who has taqwa. And if he doesn't love her, then at least he's not going to harm her, because he has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's not going to transgress the limits, not because he doesn't want to, but because he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware. And that's a reality. And sometimes people don't like to hear that, like that's the ultimate kind of factor that's there, but that's something that needs to be there in order to allow in order to ensure and to maintain that things are done in the proper way. In order to maintain that things are done in the proper way. And obviously, taqwa is something that fluctuates and goes up and down and these kind of things. And it's a journey. It's not an all or nothing thing, but that's the most important ingredient that's there, right? And that comes with all of our relationships, not just not just marriage, and not just even not just family, but in all of our relationships, if they're based off of the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it allows for those relationships to be healthy. It allows for those relationships to flourish, and it allows for those relationships to be maximized and enhanced, and to reach the highest, to reach the highest level, and to and to reach the potential that they can, because a person recognizes that this relationship, they have a right over me. I have a responsibility towards them. And that's a responsibility that I'm not just accountable to them, I'm accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, in a relationship with your parents, you may be frustrated with them, you may be upset with them, it may be even in cases unfair with you, but the thing that allows you to still treat them in the best way is to allow them to still treat you allow you to still treat them in the best way is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, you have love for them, and that may be something that pushes you to still treat them with goodness, but sometimes that can wane, or sometimes that can, the other emotions can kind of, flare up and overcome or overtake that emotion of love. And so what's the thing that can help you even when you may not feel that emotion, or you may not feel like you want to treat them with goodness, is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So and that's why you find even in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Nisa, with the discussions on marriage and on divorce, there's always, almost always you have it end with the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's the thing, especially in marriage, especially in divorce, even more so in divorce, right? That the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs to be there to make sure that everyone's rights are being given to them, and so on and so forth. Jazakallah khair for reminding me. So there I have a question from last week about modern day maids working other homes versus slaves of that time. Lots of talk about women getting abused as slaves. Yeah, so this is a very big problem that a lot of times is maybe swept under the rug or not given a lot of attention. SubhanAllah, just yesterday or the day before, I came across this social media account that was basically exposing a lot of the abuse of domestic workers. So for example, in a lot of countries where workers come in from their countries or even from within, and they work as maids in the home, and unfortunately, although I wouldn't say it's all, or even the majority or most, but a lot are abused and are, treated worse than sometimes than slaves, in terms of like their pay is withheld. There's physical abuse, even sexual abuse, right? And by the way, no one can have. This doesn't apply here, where a person has someone as a worker, or they bring them in as a maid in this way, and then sexually abuse them under the guise of, well, this is my worker, and try to somehow in a convoluted way connect it to slavery at that time. That's not at all a proper connection or valid in any way. So that's something that is an unfortunate reality that I think needs to, it's not something I think, at least Allahu A'lam, that I haven't seen here, and that's the benefit of like a lot of the workers' rights and stuff here. But if you just see, and subhanAllah, if the Prophet ﷺ talked about a woman going to the hellfire for abusing a cat, then what about people who abuse human beings and treat them in this way? It's very problematic. It's very problematic. So that's something that needs, I think, to be brought to attention as well, especially in those places. And again, alhamdulillah, I don't think really it happens here, but in those places where there are those maids or workers or in-house. I know some people who have them, by the way, who treat them with ihsan, and they treat them with excellence. And a lot of these workers are kind of, are in need of a lot of help to be able, a lot of them maybe they leave their country, they leave their families behind for years at a time to work as maids, as these kind of workers, to be able to support their family. So they leave their family, their children and stuff for years to be able to send money home and support their family in that way. So, and it's a very, very unfortunate, uh, very, very unfortunate reality that and I think we can't hide or. And unfortunately, it happens in Muslim countries. I'm not. Obviously, it's not limited to Muslim countries, but we have to set ourselves at a higher standard, right? So if people are coming and leaving behind their families and looking for work and looking for this source of rizq, then they should be treated with kindness and respect and with honor and these kind of things, right? And if that doesn't work out, then send them back or let them go. But to keep someone and not pay them and keep them as a slave or abuse them physically or abuse them in any other way, this is wal-iyadhu billah, it's very, very problematic, very, very disgusting, very disgusting. May Allah protect us. May Allah forgive us. But it can't be hidden. Definitely. Especially in Muslim countries. So that is بعيد جدا, very, very far away, very, very far away from the Islamic concept of treating how to treat a worker. Prophet ﷺ says, give the worker his due, his wage before his sweat dries, right? These are your brothers and your, even as slaves in the Islamic concept of slavery, and they eat from what you eat, they dress from what you dress. You can't burden them more than they can handle. Imagine, this is not even slavery as a form. It's called slavery, but it's much, much, much worse, much, much worse. This is a little bit what we were talking about yesterday. So not to get caught up in the names, slavery versus not slavery. You can have something that's called slavery that is, the person is treated 100 times better than what's not called slavery, but they're being dealt with worse than animals, and especially, even you see it lead to sometimes their death, and sometimes these kind of things. It's very, very problematic, And again, I think maybe it's not mentioned as much here in our discourses in our communities because I don't think it's found here, right? But it is something I think that we have to recognize is a reality, even if it's in other places. And if we have access, maybe we know people in other countries who have that, that they're engaged in that, either they're engaged in that or they're in a place, in a position that they can say something about it, then it's something that I think that needs to be addressed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And may Allah forgive us. And it's easy for us to talk about it when it's something far away from us and we're not ourselves engaged in it, but we have to, I think, check our own selves and make sure that we're also not involved in oppressing or taking the rights of anyone as well. Jazakallah khair. So inshallah, I think we will close with that. We won't continue any ayat. We'll continue next week from ayah 56. Bi'idhnillah. Yeah, so next week we'll talk about the ayahs of hijab. I think 2 more weeks inshallah and we'll finish the surah. 1 to 2 weeks inshallah we'll finish the surah. Bi'idhnillah. Any other questions before we close off? جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيكم. Okay, inshallah, then we will close with that. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.